Welcome Guardians to the Guided Dog channel. On this video we're going to be discussing what the best dog food for your dog is. And we're going to be speaking pretty broadly because no one dog food is going to be best for your dog. We know now that with many of the breeds that we have evolved over the many generations up to this point with the domestic dog, that there are different dietary needs for each dog. But broadly speaking, in this video, we're going to be talking about what the best category is to be feeding your dog, and we'll go into a little bit of detail on how you can go about making decisions as far as feeding your dog within that category goes. I will make the disclaimer that we are still learning about what is best for the dog as it stands today, dietarily, and the information in this video should not be taken as medical advice, but more like broad general guidelines so that you can begin to feed your dog in the best way that we know how today. So if I told you that you could get all of your nutrition from a little baked nugget that stayed good on the shelf for months at a time and that you would never have to eat anything else to get all of your nutritional requirements, would you believe me? Probably not. At least not if you apply any logic to that in what we know today about what diets are best for humans. And yet, up until very recently, that's what a lot of dog food industries have led us to believe, where a kibble that stays good or a canned food that stays good on the shelf for months at a time is good for that animal and that you never have to feed them anything else. It's nutritionally complete in that way. So we know now that that's definitely not true, and that even the most expensive bag of kibble or the most expensive canned food is still going to have things in it that make it shelf stable, and as a dried food, it's still not going to be the healthiest for you. We already know that for humans, raw foods really are the best, whether you subscribe to a vegetarian or vegan diet or as an omnivorous diet. So for dogs, we can safely assume that a raw diet, one way or the other, is going to be the best way to feed them. And that would be really with any animal in your care. So this video is going to discuss the different types of raw feeding that we see today. And I will add in a little bit of my own opinion and experience with what I've been doing thus far for my own animals, to lend you into an alternative theory that hasn't gained as much traction yet within the raw feeding community, but I personally believe in it wholeheartedly, and I will share more of that with you in this. It should be noted that with what we are learning today about the different kinds of raw foods that we can give our dogs, that the information in this video you should not take as medical advice, and with each dog it's going to be different what each dog is going to do well on. So it will be up to you as the guardian to experiment with that and find what works best for your dog. But I will give you some resources so that you can look into that a little bit further and do the research yourself and make the best possible decisions for your dog. So there is a website called nomorevetbills.com. I'll put the link in the description below. Run by a woman named Nora Lenz, and she has an ebook available on her website. It will be the best investment that you make towards feeding your dog in a much healthier way and getting away from all of the commercial foods that are available. Because even the raw foods, the raw commercial foods, don't follow a feeding protocol as is outlined on this website by this person who has many, many years of experience feeding this way. I would highly recommend that you purchase this book from Nora and read it front to back so that you can understand the theory behind why this particular feeding protocol is better than some of the other raw feeding protocols that are out there today. So in the raw feeding community, you have generally two different models. You have the prey model raw, and then you have the BARF diet, B-A-R-F. So the prey model raw is meat only, whereas the BARF diet, which is bones and raw foods or biologically appropriate raw foods, will include both meat and fruits and vegetables. So in the book by Nora, and the diet that I personally follow with my dogs, is more aligned with the BARF diet. So it's a mixture of both meats and then fruits and vegetables, which, as we're finding today with research, that wolves out in the wild and wild dogs are not only carnivorous. They will actually eat whatever fruits and vegetables or green materials that they have in their environment versus just eating meat only. It's a different story for cats, but we're covering dogs only on this channel. You can still find that information in Nora's book as far as raw feeding for cats, if you're curious. But the difference with the feeding protocol that is outlined in this book and the one that I follow is what she refers to as rotational monofeeding, which basically is just a fancy way of saying that you feed the meats on one day and then you will feed the fruits and vegetables on another day. And that's really breaking it down very simply. There's tons more information in the book, but you feed them on different days basically to avoid any potential digestive conflicts. So because they digest at different rates, you will avoid issues by feeding them on separate days. And in fact, it will be better absorbed nutritionally if you do that. Okay, so that we now know that we're going to be feeding raw foods, raw meats, and fruits and vegetables. What kind of each of those is safe to feed? So we're just going to go over this very, very briefly, and in general. There will be other videos that will go into depth about specific questions, and of course Nora's book as well goes over in depth about particular questions relating to this diet. But for myself, I'll just use my dogs as an example. I have dogs ranging in size from 12 pounds on up to 65 pounds. So the amount of bone, or the types of bone that I feed each of them, is going to be a bit different. But in general, I feed them little Cornish hens that I get. So rather than full-size chickens, I will cut up chunks of whole Cornish hen, and they will eat the bone. It is safe to eat uncooked bone, and poultry bone is softer, so it's easier for them to eat. They will get the Cornish hens on their meat days, and then at my local butcher shop, I go and I ask for the leftover shavings and cuttings from when they cut the steaks that people eat. So when they're cutting T-bones and other large hunks of meat, they will have what some butchers will call bone dust, and I will feed that in sparing amounts to my dogs because it does contain a lot of fat, which is something that you want to try to avoid as much of if possible, because a more natural diet out in the wild is going to have very, very lean meats, so the fat that comes on our agriculturally processed livestock is going to be more than the dog is used to. And there'll be another video on that as well, as far as why fat is a problem. But anyway, the bone dust that I use in there, I will buy that from the butcher, or sometimes if you're lucky, the butcher will just give it to you. And you can sprinkle that in there for a little extra calcium boost, or a little bit of extra meat in there on top of the Cornish hen that I'm using. As long as you have a good source of meaty protein in there and a balance of bones, that is a good source for the dogs for their meat days. You want to avoid the cuts of meat and things that have a lot of fat on them. Pork is very fatty, so you want to try to avoid that one. Most poultry is pretty good to use. Or, of course, if you have access to any kind of wild gamey meats, venison or bison or anything like that, do some research what you have locally in your area, and you might be able to come up with quite a few different options for you. And depending on the size of your dog, you may be able to feed them whole, or you may have to use a meat grinder, but that will depend on the situation on the dog. So that is for some of your meat days. On the fruits and vegetable days, you can feed yellow squash. So let's keep in mind too that all of the vegetable material will have to be cooked for the most part. Fruits, of course, can be given raw, but as far as vegetables go, in fact, I got the book right here. I will read through some of them. For your plant materials, You can do carrots, sweet potato, squash. Yellow squash is the one that I use for my dogs, just to name an example of a few things. And then for fruits, my dogs absolutely love apples, bananas, mangoes, and papaya. You can also use plums and pears. There are lots and lots of different types of fruits that you can use. The key thing to remember with those is that when you're giving any of these to your dogs, don't try to disguise it with, adding something to make it more appetizing for them. Switching over to a diet like this might be troublesome for some dogs. Most dogs take to it very easily, but if there are certain things that they don't eat or don't want to eat, don't try to force them. You want them to be eating things that they naturally would consume without trying to bribe them. Also, quinoa, it's a very good additive for the vegetable days and the plant days. It is technically a seed, and it's very digestible if you cook it thoroughly for them. You want to avoid things like regular potatoes and rice, wheat, and barley. There is entirely too much starch in that, even if you cook it way down for the dogs to be able to digest. So our domestic dogs do have some ability to digest starchy foods. They aren't quite like us, where they have that ability, where they have the extra enzymes within their saliva, the amylase, to be able to digest that. But to some degree, some of these other things like quinoa is digestible to them, and it's a good additive for their plant days for them to help them feel a little more full. So those are just a few suggestions for you on the things that you can feed as far as meat days and fruits and vegetable days. I would encourage you again to buy the book. It's got lots more information that I won't give all of that to you here in the video. It's better to have that resource for you, and to credit Nora for all of her years of hard work in amassing that information to purchase that book from her. So there is a decision then that in responsible dog guardianship that by the end of this video you may come to realize you must make, which is that will you choose to still buy convenient foods that are already made for the dog, which are, even the raw foods commercially made, still are not best for the dog as far as the rotational mono-feeding protocol goes? And are you then going to take the time to dedicate to making your dog's food in a way that's best for them? And I would hope that if maybe you don't necessarily have the means to be able to do that now, that you would make the choice to move towards that model and begin to make the time to feed them properly in order to practice the most responsible dog guardianship that you can. It does take a little bit of a commitment and a little bit of time to prep this kind of diet, but it also encourages you to slow down and make decisions better, not just for them, but also for yourself. I know that when I'm making my dog's food, I will be munching the vegetables and all of those things that I'm cooking right alongside that, and it's much better for me as well. And in taking care of them better, ironically, I have then started to take care of myself better. Usually it's the other way around. But in doing that, I have then made better decisions for myself. So I hope that this encourages you to take the time to slow down and make your own dog's food, and to believe that it's not as scary as maybe some other institutions have made you believe. Oftentimes those are scare tactics in order to continue to get you using products that aren't really best suited for your pet, but are really more in the best interest of the industry promoting it. So thank you for watching, and Pa Maste.